the birds are singing and we're walking across a field here and I'm with the farmer John McHugh on his farm in Laois. John, it is a beautiful day. I feel like you've ordered it especially for the Organic Matters podcast this week, brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. So just in front of me we have a number of cows. So tell me, they're dairy cows, the breed, and how many have you got and how many acres are you farming here?
So I'm milking 60 cows, and there's 230 acres on this farm. So it's not all in grassland. There's some forestry, and there's some kind of areas that are left to go a bit wilder. And there's community garden, and there's various little different projects on the farm. 60 cows and followers. So there's like 100 animals on the farm, and the breed, it was traditionally, when I started farming, the breed was British Frisian. And so I was intensive at the time and was expanding a lot, and I moved to New Zealand Frisian and to Jersey Cross. And when I started organic in 2016, the herd was predominantly Jersey Cross, and then I started using some Norwegian Red just to bring a three-way cross in, and now I've moved to Irish Mild. And so so the last 2 years all the heifers are Irish Milds.
And I guess your journey into organic, because it sounded like you did kind of swallow the conventional pill, hook, line and sinker to begin with.
So I suppose as I had expanded so much from 35 cows in when I started farming in 2001, was a mixed farm with there was 100 acres of cereals, and there was 100 sheep, and there was beef enterprise and sugar beet and wheat, so you were busy all year round. And so I did, specialising in dairy allowed simplification. It was also more profitable. I suppose as I expanded up in 2015, I was milking 160 cows, but I definitely felt I had lost resilience, and there was just something eating away at me the whole time, that this system, everything could collapse. And I suppose I had become a lot less reliant on my own resources. So now I had big fertiliser bills, meal bills were starting to creep up. I had employed labour. I was dependent on a lot of things. I had more debt on the farm, so I just had become a lot more reliant on things outside my control. And I just felt I wanted to take control for myself, and I seen organic as a first step towards that. In obviously to cut out a lot of inputs as a start, and then by having a lower stocking rate, you're farming within the farm's own resources and your own resources.
I mean, what's your stocking rate? What was it, and what's it gone down to?
So in 2015 I was at 2.9 livestock units a hectare. So I was at the upper end, just before derogation. So it was 160 cows, and there was 70 replacement heifers. And so the plan was to contract rear out them, and so to milk over 200 cows. And so there was a massive U-turn. I suppose when I started organic, I had more ideas of maybe having a higher output organic system, and I suppose as you go down, my whole perspective just changed dramatically, I suppose.
And what's the stocking rate are you at now?
So now I'm at 1.1 livestock units a hectare. Not on the whole farm. That's excluding some of the areas that that I'm not grazing at the minute.
And I saw some sheds on the way in, and I'm interested to know, how do you outwinter cattle, or do you outwinter cattle, or how do you manage that side of things?
Yes, so actually I have shed space for obviously a lot more cows than I even have, but I do. The last 2 years I've outwintered. So last year the cows were out until I think the 25th of January.
That's incredible.
Yes, then they were brought in literally for calving, and they went straight back out again.
Because I was literally reading my weekly grass report, newsletter that we get, and it was saying that you should push your grazing rotation and try and keep the cows out until the end of November, but you've basically got it to January. How are you managing that? Because we're in a field at the minute. Are you extending your rotations? Because traditionally it's every kind of even 19 to 25 days. Yeah. So bring it down to kind of a base level for people listening. So I know you were very into holistic grazing. Yeah. So what are you doing now?
Yeah, so I suppose when I started off, when I was conventional farming, I was doing the traditional 21-day rotation, or even sooner with golf ball grazing, where you were grazing relatively low covers and
about
cleaning
4
them out.
centimetres.
Yes, exactly, and cleaning them out really well. And when I started organic, I suppose I was exposed to the idea of holistic grazing, and it very much caught my attention, just this ability to build a lot of carbon in the soil quickly and to increase fertility. and potentially to improve diversity. And so I started in 2016. I started holistic planned grazing, and so I was allowing rotations to become much longer. I was also using a lot of multi-species swards, so the potential for the two of them, there was a synergy there. And so the rotations were lengthened. I practiced holistic planned grazing from 2016 up to 2021 when I changed my grazing system again. So that was a learning curve, and there was lots of advantages to that planned grazing. Just allowing pastures to flower and seed obviously brings a lot more birds and insects. And you can build, you are returning a lot more, you're trampling a lot of material back into the...
So how long were your rotations then? Were they 70 days?
They were pushing up towards 70 days, yeah.
And would the grass have been kind of over knee high for people, just to give people an idea
especially,
of it?
So there would be variation around the farm. So in a more pure perennial ryegrass sward, it wouldn't grow to knee high even, it'd be lower. But in the multi-species swards, there was times where I couldn't see the cows as I let them in, so and so you could work in them kind of pastures, you could work really well, you could get a really good trample effect, you could
I know you supply Glenisk, and I'm thinking of kind of conventional or even just kind of a regular enough of a dairy farmer or any farmer listening thinking like, but what about the quality of the cows, or what about the quality of the milk? So what happened to the milk when you were doing holistic grazing?
So there was no because I suppose you're never forcing the cows to graze out a paddock, so they're essentially only eating the top third, so the quality of what they're grazing is still quite high. They're also, like, as I said, it was when you'd let the cows into a pasture, the first thing they could do is go around eating the seed heads off certain grasses. And also with varieties, when there was diversity in the sward, everything isn't going to be gone to seed head at one time. So in conventional farming, I suppose when we reseed a field, usually we pick, it's just perennial ryegrass, and you maybe have 3 or 4 varieties in a mix, and they're all got the same heading dates. And so those kind of pastures, when the quality declines, it can all decline together. So when you have diversity, like if you have a range of grasses, some grasses will go to seed in April, some grasses won't go to seed till July, so it's having that diversity was important to kind of even out quality, so it's not all going to seed at the one time. So the cows might just go around eating seed heads, then they'll munch into the clover. So quality was never a huge issue. I think over time there probably was. I did see cocksfoot started to become more dominant. And the main issue then also was pastures were getting much thinner. So I suppose I done the holistic planned grazing course back in run by 3LM back in 2020, I think it was. And at that time, there was a big rethink in my mind. I had been exposed to a different type of grazing system called shortgrass grazing. At the same time, I had heard about holistic planned grazing. There was a group of European farmers. They were a mixture of German, Belgium, Swiss, and they were on a tour of Ireland anyway. And they had told me, one of the guys on it, he's like equivalent of Teagasc, researcher, and he promotes this kind of shortgrass grazing. Okay,
so we're in a field at the minute, and we'll walk a bit closer to the cows. So I can see a lot of clover in the sward, a lot of white clover, and I can see some ragwort. Am I allowed to say? Am I allowed to say that?
You can indeed. Yes,
yeah. And not too much now, I have to say. But and I see some butterflies as well, and I see the cows looking very content. So short grass grazing. Give me the lowdown on it, because I have this idea. So mob grazing in my head, roughly speaking, is maybe the grass comes up to about knee height. We've got lots of grasses flowering. We've got maybe meadowsweet in there.
Yep.
We've got different grasses, and then maybe you kind of take a big strip and kind of strip graze it, and you're continually moving the cows forward onto a fresh bit kind of every time, and not grazing it down too tightly, but they get a fresh bit every day, and they trample down the residual, and that helps build soil biocarbon. So but short grass grazing. Okay, what is short grass grazing.
Okay, so I suppose, this is probably turning everything on its head about holistic grazing. But I suppose holistic grazing, where that comes from, Alan Savory in Africa, he was looking at the huge herds of wildebeests and how they moved around the savannas and, in massive herds. So essentially there was really high grass, really tall grass, and they'd trample it down. They were being chased by predators. And something similar happens in North America with the huge herds of bison. And so these parts of the world, they're natural grasslands, but in Ireland we have what we call semi-natural grasslands. So they've evolved through human interaction with it. And so I don't actually think that's how grasslands have evolved in Ireland with massive herds. And so what happens as the grass grows really tall, it tends to get thinner because this angle of the sun at this latitude is less than in more equatorial areas.
I love that. I just started thinking about that I need to take rainfall into account when I'm doing a grass measurement,
Yes.
and you're taking angle of the sun.
Well, essentially, without even getting that technical, essentially the grass was getting thinner over time. And so we all know, when you graze tighter, you tend to get thicker pastures. So anyone who's sheep will see, they have lovely thick pastures. And so short grass or continuous grazing is maybe another way of describing it. So it's very different to what farmers associate with block grazing, where you let cows out in a 10-acre field and come back 2 weeks later and move them somewhere else. So essentially you're grazing over the whole farm at a really even rate. So one of the German guys just say he actually done work experience in the farm. So on his farm he had 2 blocks, a night block and a day block, and he just rotated between them. And he was in a special area conservation, and there was huge amounts of wildflowers on his farm. So this type of grazing system was actually promoting. And so what happens when you let grass grow really tall, there is some species of like meadowsweet could do well in it, and other species could do well, but it actually smothers out a lot of other species. And especially as well when in early springtime, when you because grass will start growing ahead of a lot of the other plants. They'll be shyer and they won't. It's going to smother them out. So in early springtime, and this kind of grazing is when you're kind of hitting it hardest. So you're rotating around relatively quickly. There's not much grass growth. But every time you graze it, there's always a little recovery. Even if the temperatures are 3 or 4 degrees Celsius, you'd say there's no growth. But you graze it, there's like a little bit of recovery regardless.
And are you doing any form of strip grazing, or are you just giving them no form of strip grazing? Okay. And how much space, kind of on average, are the cows getting at one go?
So the cows on average, maybe they're on like 15-acre fields. So the minute at where we're standing here now, they've access to 15 acres. So there's a few different paddocks they can go into this next field. There's another 6 acres out there. And so there's loads of advantages. So first of all, the pasture gets a lot more dense, and because of that it becomes a lot easier to outwinter. Also the main advantage that, like, the German farmers were telling me, is that you don't actually grow any more grass per hectare, but you get more milk per hectare. So essentially quality is vastly improved. So I was saying before about the holistic plant grazing, because you're only grazing the top third, but over time there was still a reduction in quality because cocksfoot was starting to become more dominant. And also it looks like you have a huge quantity of grass on farm, but it's very misleading, because if you were to run into a deficit and you had to start forcing them in, you're going to force them into unpalatable material that will hit production. Where in this type of grazing, it looks kind of the opposite. It never looks like there's as much there, but there's actually
it looks a tiny bit patchy. Not to be overly critical, but it does look patchy.
And that's what happens. So as the year, so up until maybe June, it'll look like almost like it'll look very even. And then as grass growth starts to go ahead, you will start to see certain areas of the field will start to get a little bit longer, and cows will stay concentrating on other areas. And so again, that brings about diversity of height, diversity of and so like these areas, they'll continuously graze these tighter areas, because that's going to be the sweetest grass, the most palatable grass. And the other thing is, so when I take the cows out of this field, you won't particularly notice any difference from when they went into the field. So the grass is always kind of at a maximum growing state. And so the idea of holistic plant grazing was you're pumping lots of carbon back in, trampling lots of carbon in, but that kind of carbon is just labile carbon. So labile carbon has quite a short cycle time. So what you trample in this year could be gone next year back into the atmosphere, whereas humus is largely produced through the exudates of plants. And so how you do that is you maximize the growing the grass growth, and so with holistic plant grazing, often after maybe 40 days, depending on different times of the year and depending on the pasture, the grass tends to stagnate, and you could go from 40 to 70 days and nothing might happen in the field. It just might look the same as And so with this, you're always keeping it in the maximum growing state. So in my mind, actually, you're potentially building humus at a faster rate than holistic plant grazing.
I can feel people crying.
Yeah.
I thought I had the holistic thing cracked,
Yes.
and now you've just blown my mind. So this field, this 15 acre block, how long on average are you going to keep cows in each block, and then how long before they go back into it?
So I'm twice a day milking, so every milking they're moved. So essentially,
Every milking they're moved.
Yeah. So that's it. So when they, like as I said, this evening they'll come out here, you wouldn't even know they were on it. It's just it'll look the same when they came out as they went in.
So they're moved. So they'll be moved this evening to another field, and will they be back in here tomorrow morning, or what?
No. So they mightn't be back here for another week.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Okay. So it depends on the farm. As I said, depends on the layout of the farm, how many blocks you have. So to try and kind of keep them evenly over the area, you might. So I have maybe around 12 blocks at the minute. So I'm rotating around 12 blocks. Okay. And some of them are varying in size, but they're generally in around 15 acres. But there's a few smaller ones, so I might hit them less often. And as an experiment, I'm hitting some of them the same, just to see it would simulate how it would work on a higher stocking rate. Which it does work. It will work. You could operate this system on a much higher stocking rate as well, and many of the German farmers are.
And I guess bringing it back again, ragwort. So maintenance of weeds, because that's been an issue for a lot of organic farmers. Are you going to top this field, or have you been topping at all?
No, so I haven't topped since I went organic, actually. So I suppose a big driver for me was I've been involved in the Farming for Nature, and so
Did you have a big rush of ragwort, and has it just diminished over time,
or
what's
ragwort's
happened?
an interesting one. So actually, with holistic plant grazing, ragwort didn't particularly do well in that system, so it kind of stagnated. So like you can see, there's quite a lot of ragwort in this field.
I've seen worse, to be honest.
Yeah, so I have worse as well. So
Oh, it's calculated.
Yes.
You brought me to this one. Okay.
Yeah. So initially when I started organic, there was pretty much no ragwort on this farm. And so my mindset was, I suppose I was doing a lot with multi-species swards, and I often kind of questioned this idea of superimposing diversity in, and was drawn to the idea that actually weeds are trying to fix our soil, they're trying to bring balance, and if a weed is really trying to grow, we're suppressing its action, and we're actually, and this is shown, it is proven, again, so in building humus in the soil, it's not just going to be exudates from grass that's required, it's exudates from many different plants. And so if you're limiting a certain plant, if there's a plant missing, you're going to limit your ability to fix carbon into humus in the soil. And so ragwort to me is a sign of a deficiency. It's probably linked in with potassium, different things. But in holistic plant grazing, I found by not even touching ragwort, it wasn't particularly spreading at a fast rate. But actually, since I went to short grass grazing, it has spread quite a lot more.
But you mentioned potential potassium deficiency. Mm-hmm. Do you soil test, and do you treat the soil accordingly, and what do you treat with?
No, well, I do soil test. So I'm not treating soil with anything now, though.
No lime or anything.
No. So if I look at I done total soil tests. So using the Albrecht system back in 2015, 2016, and so there's no real deficiencies there in total. There's enough calcium there's enough potassium there's enough phosphorus there's huge reserves of all of these things in the soil. So the only thing that is, if there's anything deficient, it's diversity. So it's certain plants, it's certain so if we say, lime is deficient or calcium is deficient, but actually, so clover, sheep's burnet, all these plants are really good at actually bringing calcium and making it available.
Do you reseed a seed with any clover or any?
So I originally have reseeded using a lot of multi-species swards, but now my mindset has probably changed on that. So even the last, I sowed oats, was it in 2019, and so as an experiment, after I didn't actually even reseed that field, I just started grazing it, and now that is a beautiful field of, looks like pure perennial ryegrass and white clover. And ragwort as well, but there's that. It was an interesting experiment. So it's just there's a lot more diversity. I just wanted to see how would it naturally evolve, but quality in that field is equal to anywhere else. It's equal to a pasture you would sow, and huge amounts of white clover. So with this type of grazing system, you will get white. If your soil is the right type of soil, it's not pure peat or something like that. You will get a lot of white clover just naturally appearing.
You strike me as very like content and like passionate
Yes.
about your system. Would you have been the same person if I talked to you 10 years ago or 15 years ago?
No. So I suppose then I was caught up in this kind of mindset of, you know, more cows, more money, more land, more take over all my neighbours' farms, all of this kind of chasing your tail, I suppose, mindset. And so even things like ragwort, like, so obviously there's a little bit of a letting go to allow this to happen and to allow that go through its cycle, and you could say, oh, is it going to take over the whole place? But I've seen it in some fields, so it's interesting now. I can see fields where ragwort first appeared on the farm and where I didn't control it, and those fields pretty much have, you know, maybe they're like a few ragworts you could pick them in 5 minutes out of a 6 or 10 acre field, like, you know. It's so they have kind of gone through the cycle and it finds its own balance, and it'll be at a much lower level, where the field we're standing now pretty much would have never had ragwort in it, and the fields that I have that have loads of ragwort in now have never had ragwort. It was always kept. So I'm relatively confident that it's going to have an explosion, and it's a biennial plant. So so anything we're seeing flower probably is going to be gone next year. Look, it'll spread to other patches of the field that haven't got it, but in the course of 3 or 4 years it disappears. And I've seen it happen on my neighbour's farm as well. Actually, he has like 30 acres of land that was pretty much yellow with ragwort 10 years ago, and it just totally disappeared. There's not a ragwort to be seen in it for the last 10 years.
You're giving a lot of people hope there. You have another garden that I want to talk about. Will we head over that way?
We can indeed,
yeah, we'll go over there. So what do we have in front of us here?
Yeah, so this is there's a 6 acre field here, and I suppose where we're standing now, you're looking at lots of fruit and nut trees. So the idea was, when at the same time of going organic, I became quite interested in permaculture, and I just very much liked the idea of it, and the idea of forest gardens, and the idea of, and look, to me it was a opportunity to experiment. So I sectioned off this field and planted up a lot of fruit and nut trees, and there is some kind of oak and a few birch and different things scattered through as well.
And do the cattle graze around them, or how does that work?
So sometimes what I do is in the winter time I graze a small few calves through it, just to I can fence a small few across the winter without them damaging trees. So
do you house anything for the winter?
So the cows were brought in before calving, so rather than calving outside in February, it was easier to bring them in. Yeah.
So, but how long are cattle in for over the winter?
I milk a small few over the winter as well, and they were left in as well, rather than again going to the far end of the farm on a cold, wet morning. Yes.
I think that's fair.
Yes.
I don't think anyone's going to blame you for that. But back to the trees here, and is there an ohm garden, or a garden that's based on the ohm calendar as well? Yeah.
So in the corner of this field, then there's kind of a circle that was planted with all the. So you probably have heard of the Ogham alphabet. It's an ancient Celtic alphabet, and there's a tree linked with different letters of it. And so the garden is planted with the Ogham trees. There's 2 circles. There's the 13 Ogham trees that were linked with the lunar months, and there's 20 Ogham trees that are linked with the alphabet. And so it's just divided up into sections. Then that's kind of a little community garden. So people are growing vegetables and fruit, and so again, this is part of the bigger field where again there's lots of little fruit, and there's little paths cut through it, and so over time it'll develop a lot more. And the idea was, again, I suppose when I started, when I went organic, as I said, one of the reasons was, you know, to try and become more resilient and to cut out inputs, and another reason was, again, to try and make connections to local community and to customers potentially, and, you know, so just to try and more directly connect and maybe open up avenues to cut out middlemen, and so there was different guys here also make some cheese. There's a little processing room, and little things like that have happened, nothing overly commercial as such, but it's a nice social kind of place. Yeah.
But I guess you do have a young family as well, so you do have to be some way commercial. So you supply Glenisk. Yeah. How much are you getting at the minute from Glenisk? So
the price it went up to, it was 50 cent up till June. It's gone up to 55 cent a litre now, which I'm on a grass fed only, so I feed 0 concentrates. So I just get a flat 55 cent a litre year round, or from February till November. And so that's the price. In hindsight, obviously, it was.
I know conventional farmers, non-organic, getting higher than that at the minute.
Yeah. So I suppose everything's just in flux at the minute, and it's hard to, it's in a very short space of time, prices have just skyrocketed. So look, I suppose there's advantages. My inputs, I have zero fertilizers, I have zero meals, so I'm obviously not being affected the way a conventional farmer has been affected. But obviously, yes, you would like to see a premium there, and I'm sure, given more time, that premium will hopefully will come back into the equation.
John, thank you very much for that. And if anyone's interested in reading up more about you, I think you're on Twitter and you're on a few other places as well. Not on Twitter.
No longer on any social
media.
Yes.
Okay. So if anyone's maybe the postal system.
Yes, I might. Sometimes I open my letters. I have a pile in there at the minute. So.
Okay, post by post, maybe pigeon. We'll see.
Yes.
But for now, that's it from the Organic Matters podcast, brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. And to listen to more podcasts, they come out every week. You can subscribe, or as well go to the Irish Organic Association's website at www.irishorganicassociation.ie.